We are never told the truth about conflicts, and even then, not all the truth. We were never told the truth of what really went on until at least 50 years after any event. And sometimes it's classified, reclassified for another 50 years or more. When Pierre Trudeau was the Prime Minister of Canada, the media never told the people when he was running for Prime Ministership that he had been the leader of the Young Communist Movement for Canada and led the party to Moscow for their Comintern meeting in 1952. The whole media knew, but they never bothered to mention it to the voters. And when he got in, he and René Lévesque both winked at each other and says, "We did it." They got in using the system as it already stood. And one of the last acts he did as Prime Minister was to reclassify a document listing all the communist infiltrators and members, actually party members or card-carrying members, who worked in the federal government and the massive bureaucracy. He reclassified it. That was first given at the end of World War II to the Prime Minister of Canada by Guzenko. Why would they reclassify something many, many years later? Why was it so dangerous? And here we are at the bottom, trying to wade through all the disinformation and get to the bottom of it. We can't, because we're not given access to it. Years ago, I said on one of the first radio programs I was on, if you were to look into every conspiracy book, or start with one conspiracy book that has its favorite target, and the whole book is about that target, and they bring up facts and statements made by this other person from them over there, whoever they may be, you would be convinced that that book is correct. If you stop there, you probably stay in that little pigeonhole, never looking anywhere else. And I said, if you look at every other conspiracy book where the fingers point elsewhere, you'd say, my God, this is correct too. Well, how can they all be correct? How is that possible? Is it simply that every power group has to be in conflict with every other power group for supremacy? Do they all play by dirty tricks? Is that the whole point of it? Can there be any honesty between competing parties, or is the very fact that competing in the first place all down to winners and losers? What I'm saying here, and the terms I'm using here, are used in big conferences at the United Nations, and they were used long ago, long before I was born, by the precursor, which is the League of Nations. We know again that big people, big powerful families, have funded into existence the United Nations. We know the beginnings, or some of the beginnings, of these families, which is widely written about by even the authorized authors, and how they got their start. We can go into the book The Robber Barons of the 1800s and see how the railroad companies were basically given incredible amounts of land, and even took 100 miles sometimes on either side of the track, which they years later did sell off for parcels, and so on. But it was all given carte blanche to them by their friends in government. We find that the Rockefellers were the same. An old man Rockefeller, the one that they always give us at the beginning of this dynasty, as far as the riches go, would tolerate no competition. You corner the market one way or another, or you get rid of your opposition by any means possible. It was ruthless. It was war. And today we live in a world of transnational corporations. They have no loyalty to any country whatsoever. But they do donate money to the big foundations, and the foundations run the non-governmental organizations, which are to become what's called the new democracy. And I think that was the goal in the first place of the setting up of this thing called democracy, to be honest with you. Because I've got very old books here where writers, when they heard the term the coming democracy, the one we're used to for the last 100-odd years, they said this would have to happen inevitably. You would find that the biggest, most powerful groups who could lobby governments, make friends with governments, often from the same schools as the old boys' schools as those in government and bureaucracy, would run nations. And that's been the way it has been. That's also why we've never seen a halt in the march towards what they call this new order or new world order, something people used to laugh at years ago. Instead, when the media used the words and then no one laughed. But if you use them, yeah, they would laugh at you because the public are not in on this higher reality. The sciences that I've been discussing the last few nights have worked incredibly well. The scientific indoctrination of Bertrand Russell has also worked very well in education. We've all had the same basic indoctrinations. Now, if it was possible to have peace by some weird miracle, as I say, those same foundations who haven't finished their work yet for a totally managed, controlled society would have to start another conflict. And they would. They would start another conflict. And it would be 50 years before you found out who truly started it. You'd think you had your obvious enemy, and you'd all be wrong. Back with more after the following break. Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt. We're cutting through the matrix. And just before the break I was talking about the various techniques that would be used and have been used to give us the reasons for this total control, the system of total control that's being brought in. Where they tell us we're just too immature, we run by emotion and not by logic and reason, and we have to be managed like school children. But I also mentioned that we went into various accusations made in pretty well every conspiracy book with the names there, the facts there, the statements there that you can check up. You'd have to agree that they're all correct. All of them. Every side. And if that's the case, it means that everyone, all those groups have been trying to attain power over all the other groups for an awful long time, if that really is the case. They laughed today, in fact, that the big boys at the top gave us the term conspiracy theory. And they've advocated the use of that term. And people have adopted it who are into conspiracies, not realizing that they're mocking themselves. They'll also tell you there are no conspiracies. And yet history is just one long, long story of ongoing conspiracies. If you were to ask a person working for the British government in the Home Office in the 1800s, 1900s, early 1900s, what their function was, they'd have told you, if they were honest and you were one of them, or from the right school, they'd tell you it was to basically create a British Empire across the whole globe. Wells called it the open conspiracy. He said everything's published. It wasn't quite true, but everything being published, but a lot of it was. And their goals and aims were certainly published. And he wrote about the setting up of the League of Nations, and he also said this is really the end of government as people know it, because now bureaucracies, through treaties, or countries' treaties, can actually go between or bypass the politicians and the people and communicate directly to each other through this League of Nations. So that was a new type of democracy that already came in. And it was to be bound together by treaties. The big treaties we've seen in our own lifetimes being signed, for those who can remember, and it's hard, there's so many of them.